throw to Theo Sakodjis, who I like the photo of his high school yearbook that's up on screen when you. Oh, there's the real Theo, the hairy version. You're muted, Theo, too. Theo's going to run a response panel with Lindy Dietz and Barney Glover and G Song. And then we're going to come back. Feel free to drop in, Minister, if they're starting to annoy you on the way through the response panel. Drop in, no problem. But I might hand over to Theo. Thanks, mate.
Thank you, Christopher. This is my COVID look. I have aged in 6 weeks and grown a beard accordingly. Thank you, Minister. Thank you for your time, and our hearts and thoughts and minds are with you through everything you've been through and everything you keep driving for our community.
Thanks.
In spite of that, mate. So keep up the great work. Everyone, we have 3 great panelists. Jisong from Lend-Lease, a tremendous agent and champion of Western Sydney and a son of Western Sydney, as a company driving forward. Barney Glover, as previously introduced by Chris, a tremendous thought leader, and Lindy Dietz, who's driving the great city of Campbelltown onwards and upwards to take advantage of these opportunities. The dialogue set forward a really clear agenda around recovery, reform and re-engagement, and being the path forward on the back of COVID, and as we look to take forward of both the opportunities in Western Sydney and broadly the investment that's being made on the back of the government as well as private sector as they come in behind that. So really interested in, and as we frame around recovery, what are those picks we need to be making? Where are those opportunities? And where is that moment and those actions that we can really look to do something different? So in that regard, Barney, I'm going to throw to you to begin with. Captain's pick. You're not known for doing that. You're a much more measured and scientific man. You like the counsel of the people around you. But that aside, if you had one pick, one thing that you could do that you would be investing in or undertaking coming straight off the back of the COVID crisis to drive us into recovery, what would it be and what would generate the most impact for Western Sydney?
Thanks, Theo. And if I could also acknowledge the Minister, and while I might be disappointed about Rydalmere, Minister, you can't doubt this government and the investment you've made in infrastructure, and which will go on. And the metro's great, certainty is great. I think we look at a whole range of options around Rydalmere, and we'll continue to liaise with you and the department in relation to that. But congratulations on
Thanks, Barney.
Yet another important step forward and your own contribution to it, which is remarkable. Look, having said that, if I was to say one thing, connectivity to the airport is a crucial part of it. The Minister's just indicated what the options might be there. Obviously, we have a great interest around Werrington. To see that connection from St Mary's to the airport and to the southwest would be a crucial part of what I'd say that we should get on with. The airport, it's interesting, we're going to move into a different era around air travel because of COVID. It'll recover, but it might recover in different ways. And that might shape our airport I think it's still a vitally important part of 2026. Let's not delay anything, but I think we need to think through what air travel is going to look like. And I think this is an opportunity, because infrastructure stimulus is going to be so critical, that we think about that connectivity more than just the spine from St Mary's to the airport. But I would, and I know Lindy's here online, I'd be very much encouraging that connection through the southwest at the same time. And let's do it right. If we can get up to the northwest, that would connect in a vitally important, generationally significant way.
Lindy, throwing to you, I know you've been called at various times the queen of connectivity and trying to really get the southwest connected and taking advantage of things, but you're also not a one-trick pony. So what would be your captain's pick? What's that one thing that would drive the real growth on the back of COVID coming forward, but leave the best benefit for Campbelltown and the Macarthur region, but equally take advantage and opportunities for the Parkland City and Western Sydney more broadly? You're just on mute, Lindy.
Oh, okay, sorry. I couldn't find myself.
You're all good.
I'm the third on the hat trick for the unmuting button. Sorry, guys. Thank you, Theo, and hello, Minister, and thank you for your time today. Look, I think any infrastructure investment is critical to economic recovery, but particularly in the Western Parkland City, where there's already been infrastructure committed just not funded for delivery. The need has been determined, the benefits known, the financial investment is now what's required. So sensibly, I would bring forward the projects that government has already strategically planned and committed for in the Western Parkland City, that being the North-South Rail and the rapid bus connections to each of the metropolitan clusters in the Western City. The great economic divide between the West and the East, and the further investment in the Eastern and Central cities to the absence of the West will only exacerbate the delay in economic recovery for the Western Parkland City. So I just think it's a no-brainer from my perspective.
So, Jisong, I know that Leases have got significant experience when it comes to activating precincts and driving on the back of transport-orientated development. The announcements today of the EIS on East-West is obviously, as John Burton has talked about, a significant opportunity. From Leases' perspective, where do you see being the best play? And I'm really interested in your perspective between that investment in large major projects and whole lots of small projects, and how we activate at those two levels across the region.
Okay, thanks Theo, and thanks Minister for your time. Gratefully I think the Minister's made our captain's pick for us, because we genuinely think that Metro West is going to be game changing for the state, and that ability to link the economic engine room of the Sydney CBD with the Parramatta CBD by a modern automated rapid mass transport system that is going to have profound effects on the way the economic and focal point of the city is got, all the state will move from the east to the west. And like John and Chris mentioned earlier with East London, we see great parallels, except that movement in London was from west to east. In the short term, there's an ability to employ thousands of white-collar professionals immediately in terms of their starting the design and planning of the infrastructure. And long term, there's going to be fundamental and profound benefits from an economic productivity perspective around how demographics are spread and how that affects the way we live, work and play. So from a precinct perspective, we're incredibly excited to ultimately have the opportunity to participate in the creation of precinct developments in Westmead, Parramatta and SOPA. But in terms of what we can control, we have strategic land holdings in Rozelle Bay. And off the back of COVID and off the back of the Metro West investment, our strategy is now to accelerate that development. So we feel like we can deliver thousands of homes, a large portion of social and affordable homes, before that Bay's precinct station is delivered. And we think that's going to support the business case for Metro West. And we think that will also aid to the day one activation of that precinct. And that value that we create, we want to try and share with the state to help stimulate the economy and create some social value. So we've got plans to help create a new bay run around Rozelle Bay, linking our vision with the vision for the fish markets as a viable alternative to the Drummoyne Bay run. And we also have a vision to try and restore and reactivate the old Glebe Island Bridge to create that economic relationship between the Bay's precinct, Pyrmont and the Sydney CBD. In terms of your question around small projects and big projects, you know, we see the benefit of pursuing both typologies of projects. In terms of small projects, we find that any investment that we make provides a higher cost-benefit ratio in terms of economic stimulus and the promotion of secondary development. We find that the investment in our greenfield developments pushes cash deeper into the economy and our local supply chain benefits. From a large precinct perspective, we believe there's an amplifying effect and impact from our investment, and there's a scalability to those benefits, and the structural uplift that comes from those precinct developments has a broader impact and a broader benefit socially and economically to the wider
I'm interested in picking up on that point with Lindy. Lindy, I've heard you speak recently about the trauma and the damage to small business and medium businesses in your region in particular. How important, because big projects take time, the Minister's talked about the lag times, making sure we make the investments right. how important are those small localized projects to start getting the activity in your town centres and starting to get those small businesses, sole traders active and operating in a position to take advantage of the major projects as they flow through downstream?
Theo, it's critical. Small to medium business is really, really suffering at the moment. We have lost 30% already of our small to medium business because of COVID-19. I think there is great opportunity for them to get involved. If I gave you some local examples, we've got some amazing local industry that can pivot really quickly in terms of their operations. We have an example of BresMed in Ingleburn, an Ingleburn company that's producing concepts and prototypes and iterations of valves for alternative ventilators, and that wasn't their core business pre-COVID. We've got big concrete factories. We've got all of those things that are actually going to stimulate the big major projects. So actually involving and engaging those small to medium businesses are essential, I think, to the life of our city.
So Barney, the Minister touched on it earlier when talking about stage 2 for light rail, but Lindy's just touched on it there about how businesses are pivoting and evolving. We've seen a lot of commentary from people almost starting to see, do we need a new sense of nationalising and bringing local business and prioritising Australia over other things, even at the expense of cost? To me, it seems like a tremendous opportunity to harness the brain power of the region, to not go back to the future, but to transform to a new future. What are your thoughts on how, coming out of COVID and with major infrastructure and the business community that we've got around Western Sydney, how we can look to innovate and really drive to a new normal that's about a new way of doing business, as opposed to just trying to re-engineer relics of the past?
Well, I think we're beginning to see the debate going on about Australia being as self-sufficient as it can be. COVID has stretched us in a lot of ways that we didn't anticipate, and rapidly. I know within the university we've had to transition nearly 1,200 units of study online in 2 weeks, and to do it well and to do it in a world-class context has been extraordinary. That's been the case in universities all around the country. So higher education is never going to be the same. Technology is going to influence the way in which we do business and the way we reach out and support businesses. One of the other really interesting things that's emerging as we Zoomify the world at the moment is we're engaging with each other like this, and I congratulate the Dialogue for the way in which Chris and the team are connecting people together in a way that overcomes some of the tyranny of traffic and distance. We need to address all of that post-COVID, but it's great to see we can still stay together. And we're going to learn from that and develop from it. I think Western Sydney's got a great opportunity as part of the rebuilding and reframing of our economy. Clearly, there's going to be some areas of focus that's coming around the Aerotropolis, for example. I mean, one of the crucial things to get right now is to bring some projects forward. The Aerotropolis is a crucial part around the airport's going to be critical to that and the way business will engage. GPOP is a really crucial part of it. We talked a moment ago, you said Parramatta to Sydney Olympic Park. I think Jay said that. I think it's Westmead to Sydney Olympic Park. And last year, the University of Sydney and Western Sydney University put forward our plan for bigger, better and sooner for that connectivity. Well, I think the imperative now is even stronger. The Metro decision today by the Minister gives us certainty around that and that project and how we activate it. As Jay just said, we can activate it in a variety of ways. What we want to do at Sydney Olympic Park to connect with small to medium-sized enterprises and startups and innovations, the way Launchpad is our business incubator hub is now taking off in Parramatta, taking off in Liverpool, will be great in Campbelltown and elsewhere. I think we have a really exciting set of precincts in the West that should become a major focus of what stimulates this recovery mode and then the changing nature of our economy.
So, Christopher, back to you. And a question that I think would be interesting to the Minister in that regard is, what needs to change from what we've been doing historically, whether it's in regulation or its approach or mindset, for us to truly unlock what we're doing forward and don't make the same mistakes? Over to you, mate.
I'll supplement that to Andrew with, as I said, a lot of our current thinking is is influenced by first our trip to West London last year, which was very instructive for a Western Sydney community, particularly about the role private sector can play as better partner with you in the urban renewal and the importance of transport as a social policy lever, not just economic. But then also for you here now, it's interesting about G from Lend-Lease and Lindy here, that partnership, Dick Dusseldorp, that basically developed, first it was John MacArthur, then it was Dick Dusseldorp that developed Campbelltown, developing MacArthur Station, Bradbury, sort of things with private money. Is one of those big reform agendas for you, despite running a Herculean public sector fund, you're running the best sort of Labor public works program the world's ever seen. Do you look for a time now to flick the switch back to a bigger role for the private sector and partnering you going forward in this ambitious infrastructure program?
Oh, I mean, look, absolutely. I mean, in terms of the construction side of things and the asset maintenance side of things, that's a given. But just listening to the panel, there's a couple of things that I think kept coming out in my own mind as I was listening. Firstly, population growth. As a transport minister who's grown the number of services on a weekly basis by in excess of 40,000, and the last 5 years it's been nuts. I mean, we've seen train patronage go from 300 million passenger trips to 420 million. Wow. I think there is a big debate that needs to be had about population growth. So because immigration levels are going to be drastically affected by COVID, what that does in terms of supply and demand across business is going to be a very big question for us all. Sadly, I think also we are going to see structural unemployment. So there'll be people in their mid-50s who potentially could never work again as a result of what's happened. And so we've got to put our minds to how we can meet that challenge, because the growth projections also underpin the infrastructure projects that we're seeking to deliver over the next 40 plus years. So I don't think there's any dispute in terms of the program. I think it'd be hard pressed to find a Liberal or Labor politician in Western Sydney who would be opposed to the direction, because I think business supports it, the university sector supports it, we all support it.
The West is prepared to pay to play.
To a point, I think, Chris, you got to be careful in saying that, because again, at the end of the day, how much private equity is there going to be really around to facilitate this? So, if we see the pause button on immigration, and Harry Triggerbroth will tell you, the confidence level in the Chinese to invest in the property market is something which, the reality is that has played a major impact in terms of the property market over the last 10 years. What we see in terms of foreign investment in that space is going to be an interesting observation. But if we are going to be more nationalistic in our approach, which, is not necessarily a bad thing, because I think globalisation has delivered some incredible outcomes, but at the same time, it's also delivered some incredible problems. We've seen that where, we become too dependent on China and, for our pharmaceuticals and PPE and everything else. And look what's happened around the world. It's been absolute growth. So, I think we've got to ask ourselves, well, okay, what is the shape of Australia in 5 years' time or 10 years' time? But how do we actually get to that pathway? So we all have this vision around Western Sydney, Aerotropolis being an incredible success, Parramatta obviously becoming a very significant CBD because it is the centre of Sydney. It's no longer really Western Sydney, it's the centre of Sydney. And we've got to, the trick to this will be keeping governments focused on the investments and the discipline around that. The thing that also gives me heart from the investment side of things is that I do think our superannuation funds will continue to look towards, good return investments, low risk. And if you've got regulated asset base, then that's even more appealing. So,
if you talk population and immigration there, one last question I'll throw to Adam, who's got some of the questions that the panelists have said in now and before. How can you, though, quite rightly use population to determine your spend of infrastructure, and tell the Sydney community that the northern beaches of Sydney won't have any more people? They don't want anyone else to come and live there, but they're going to get a beaches link when the A6, A3 congested corridor through the centre of Sydney isn't prioritised to others. Surely using government's own population projections now, which have changed since your first transport project was done, that we can say bye-bye to the Beaches Link and say hello to an A6, A3 road link, or a Campbelltown Rapid Bus. Or
you just made a big mistake, Chris, because the Princess Highway is the most important infrastructure in the state. So, you know.
Absolutely correct. How did I forget the people of the South Coast?
Yeah. I mean, look, to be honest with you, that either-or concept around infrastructure is a dangerous one, because the reality is that we should be using our infrastructure to drive jobs growth, given the vulnerabilities we now have and now face. It gets cash swirling around the state economy because people have money to spend.
Yep.
So that's the first point. Like if we don't have the cash flowing, then how can we even see any one of those 30% of small businesses that have potentially folded come back to life? And we've got an obvious challenge here. If we get a second wave of infections with COVID and small businesses have to close for a second time, this is why we've got to be very careful in the way in which we manage this. We could end up with a situation where businesses will be gone forever, and that structural unemployment will be very significant. So for me, I think staying the course with the vision, continuing to work with the private sector in terms of their confidence and their ability to invest. Value capture as a concept, I've always said this, it only, I think, can work in Australia, in an Australian context based on our population, with station precincts on a metro train. That's it. I think if you're going to look at value capture realistically, it'll only ever contribute at best 10% towards the capital cost of a project. But the only place where it can really work, given the very nature of the precinct developments, is around metro stations. That's it. That's my view, and I think the Jim Bettses of this world would probably back that in. So, I think that's important, because otherwise it just becomes a betterment tax, and I don't think any government in their right mind is going to go down a betterment levy approach, because it's failed before. And quite frankly, we've got a lot of people, particularly in Western Sydney, who have paid taxes all their lives and should be entitled to a taxpayer delivered and funded transport project to help them with their quality of life. And that's why the Northwest project has been, that's why there was no value capture applied with it, because, other than a bit of land banking from government, but, the reality is there wasn't a betterment levy applied there, because those generations of Australians living in Northwest should have had a train line put in a long time ago. I think the beauty with what we're dealing with, a blank sheet of paper around the Aerotropolis, is that gives us the capacity to use the infrastructure to grow, as opposed to putting the infrastructure in as a retrofit. And that's the exciting part there.
Thanks, Minister. As Christopher mentioned, we've got a few questions from our listeners and watchers out there. Minister, you flagged your intent earlier to move the state's bus fleet to zero emissions technology. Are you looking for ideas in this area from the private sector as part of the upcoming tender for Sydney's bus contracts, or will it be a separate project? And is there scope for electric or hydrogen bus manufacturing and maintenance to be a growth industry for GWS?
Look, naturally, you would use the franchise proceeds and savings to invest back into a sustainable fleet. What's driving me in this regard is the health impacts of diesel particulates on our community, particularly in Western Sydney. We've seen in cities around the world like London, Amsterdam, Paris, a poisoning of the population because of diesel. And, I want us to get with the program. So it's got the health and environmental impacts. So what we're doing is we'll be engaging with our private operators, but also, and importantly, manufacturers, to see what's possible in terms of a pathway, and set some clear targets where we will phase out diesel buses. Every other jurisdiction in Europe's doing it, and the whole of life cost for an electric bus is on a par with diesel. So, we have failed, I think, dismally, where we have not seen air quality monitoring put in place by Transport to actually test the impact in terms of the high concentration diesel particulates on the community. We know it's having a major impact in Europe in terms of health outcomes. So if it's happening there, I bet you it's happening here. So we want to be able to change that. And of course, it makes sense in terms of transitioning the economy, in terms of the climate change policies of federal and state governments to play our part, which is where I think we have an obligation to to transition and do so affordably and effectively. And there's 7,000 diesel buses running around Sydney. I think it's time we started this work extensively.
Indeed. I should mention, I think we were scheduled to finish up at 11 o'clock,
You're right.
but if you're okay to push on till the next 10 minutes.
I'm homebound today, so that's okay.
Brilliant. The next one comes through from an anonymous attendee. Can we have more clarity on Sydney Metro West and Greater West timelines? When can we expect an operational launch?
Well, again, the key element in this is that we've said by the end of this decade we'd have it in place. It is a very big project. It's got a very big price tag, and the funding profile obviously needs to be delivered across that obviously that footprint. So the bottom line is, and this is the end game, the trick for it is getting the work underway. That's the key point. We've seen Metro Northwest, from its inception to its delivery, you're looking at a pretty much an 8-year sort of build. So, and commissioning. So, this is a largely underground project, but there will obviously be elements to it which require a lot of at-grade work. And I would expect to just get on with the job, and we're seeing that now. We're moving ahead with stabling facilities. We're working to get the tunnel boring machines back in the ground. But this is the biggest project in the state's history, and we have to get it right.
Andrew, the federal government promised a train to the airport at Badgerys Creek when it opened in 2026. The state government didn't make the same promise. Would you imagine at this point there will be trains meeting the first planes that land, notwithstanding whatever might happen with the airport now with timing and COVID?
Yeah, I think it's
dependent. Is it an ish or a hard date?
Look, I think it's an ish, to be honest, realistically. I think, depending on the aim will be to have it as close as possible. I think it makes a lot of sense to have a train line open when the airport opens, but, again, it'll come down to the timing of when the airport actually opens.
And to have trains running when planes are running, 24-hour train to meet 24-hour airport?
Yeah, so I think with the community, they're just going to be happy to see very significant projects well and truly through their build in the next decade. And, if the alignment is out by a few months or whatever it might be, fair enough.
And there's
it's
a
very
tough lady
hard
from Campbelltown there watching. What does she have to do to convince you that stage 2 of Airport Rail should be to Campbelltown and not to Blacktown? There's sort of north versus south argument. I know the feds reckon they can sell an airport better if they're linking to Castle Hill first stage. I understand that argument, but I also understand the argument of just like Northwest was promised for years and got nothing. Campbelltown's been on a promise since 72.
Absolutely.
And could do a little more.
Yeah, which is why, gazetting corridors and getting those things right is what I've been on about. At the end of the day, I'm not going to be potentially in this role when that decision gets made, but I think having a good process for the people of Campbelltown to be able to participate in the best way forward is important. The thing is, regardless of where you live, this is not just about the mass transit solutions. We've got to be looking at the first mile, last mile solutions. I think it's fair to say one thing, and one observation I have made with light rail projects, we've had as much success with the turn up and go high frequency double-decker bus running through the Northern Beaches as anything really. So the more standalone we can put our transport versus the motorway, the car network, the motor vehicle network, the better. So for us, I think there's got to be a process. We've done some early analysis in relation to all of this. I think logic would tell you, if governments are smart and we can get good federal and state working together, a good sale price on the airport could very well mean, these projects starting construction more quickly. I'm a big believer everyone focusing in on end date and when this is going to be complete. I'm actually more of the viewpoint, I'm more interested in the start date, because once we can get things progressing from a construction perspective, that gives me a lot more confidence that, no one will come along and pull the pin. Because I think one of the big problems we've had with infrastructure over the generations has been the political risk associated with the project. So, look, I think the aim will be to get both tiers of government working together, and I think getting the federal political alignment, because I don't think the state's balance sheet is going to be able to deliver the rail lines that we're talking about in terms of their magnitude anytime soon, given that we're having to fork out very significant dollars between Metro West and the Metro Western Sydney Airport, and deliver everything else.
Any of the panellists want to ask a question of the Minister, or we've got him as well? Lindy, you're marshalling the forces.
Yeah. Minister...
Wayne, can I ask you this? Can we at least get a hard date on the rapid bus from the airport? I mean, I think there's still some confusion. I don't know if that's Canberra or Macquarie Street who's responsible, but...
It'll be us. I mean, look, a good standalone... we have seen bus rapid transport around the city and, its effectiveness. I do think increasingly what we will see is longer vehicles able to carry more people and the frequency of them being a lot better if it's properly planned for. So, the B line in the Northern Beaches, I mean, it's over $500 million spend. Why? Because we've built 6 commuter car parks alongside it at innovative, express bus stops along the route so that people can get into the city quicker. So, I mean, that's been a roaring success. So I just think, it's not just a case of putting a bus on the road. It is, working out the commuter car parks around it, or what into the future will be, automated vehicle.
Lindy, it sounds like a nice
stations.
argument for an upgrade at MacArthur Station too, to service the health education precinct.
Yeah, look, Minister, I think, it's obviously there's evidence to say that cities that invest in significant public transport obviously have a higher degree of success with their, in terms of economic growth.
Yeah.
I think one of my questions to you would be that the Prime Minister, the Premier and 8 mayors signed off on an agreement with City Deals that Campbelltown, for example, would get rapid bus from day one of the opening of the airport. So that the fastest growing region of MacArthur in Australia could leverage off those opportunities. And I agree with you, like the importance of gazetting corridors. But to date, none of that has happened for us. Do you have any idea of a timeline of when there'll be some serious corridor examination done and a rapid...
No, I'm sorry, but I have to dispute that. The corridor examination has been done. It's complete. We're now at gazettal phase. And that's the point. Like we know where the corridors are, we know where the rail lines have got to go. And in terms of bus rapid transit, I mean, the beauty with those types of projects is they're not a 10-year build. I mean, I delivered B-Line on one of the busiest corridors in the country. The beauty with Campbelltown to Western Sydney Airport is I've got a lot more options in terms of how you might design a bus network with the express high-frequency turn-up-and-go services, not the typical bus timetabled 65-seater that we're traditionally used to, but the high-frequency, innovative electric vehicles that can move a lot of people very quickly per hour. And so, I've been a fan of the double-deckers, obviously in terms of B-Line, but the more I see the buses out of France, for instance, with RATP, where they are, 4 doors on the side, can carry significant numbers. I think we need to look very closely at how that can work. But I mean, in terms of just bedding it down, I mean, we can get on with the transport planning around the best way that the bus rapid network will be in place, and making sure that it is certainly there from the day the doors open at the airport. We've got that time frame. It's not like a train line development.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic news, Minister, because yesterday we were in a meeting with Transport where they said that they didn't have any funds for railway railway corridor preservation or rapid bus preservation. So I'm really heartened to hear.
Yeah, I mean, but look, you will always have those types of bureaucratic discussions. Sometimes they're designed so that you turn around the next day and say something to the minister, but the reality and the hard, cold reality.
Long live ministerial discretion.
Yeah, we have had, welcome to my world. Their budget's $25 billion, by the way. Look, I think the thing about it is that the city deal gives a commitment from everybody. I have to be honest, I have loved, and I do love it when local government really steps up in terms of public transport. And we've seen that with Liverpool. I think Liverpool is showing the way in terms of their thinking and their innovation. I've had a good relationship with the City of Sydney around light rail for the city. So, I think there's a really good opportunity because yes, I appreciate
Parramatta
that.
Started it with the Western Sydney, with the Parramatta light rail.
Yeah. There's the exact examples. And it's not a case of me expecting local government to dip in the pockets and deliver hundreds of millions of dollars. I think it's more about how we can work together in an innovative way to get the best outcomes. So,
Vic Adams got one last question.
Just a quick one before we wrap up, CB. Thank you. The current pandemic shown us that we can move and work differently. Are there any other ways, less expensive ways, to free up capacity on our transport network, demand management strategies, work from home, etc.? And how can government influence those outcomes?
Well, I mean, look, I think at the heart of it is innovation. So, we're now seeing, we've got this challenge over the next couple of months where we're going to have to use trip planning apps to get people to think differently around peak hour. We want to shred peak hour to be a thing of the past because what worries us is that COVID could, be easily spread in a peak hour scenario. So we need people to be thinking differently about how they move around at various times of the day. So, we had in place, certainly in terms of how we can work alongside industry and business to change the way people move across the network and use technology to achieve that. I think that's important. What COVID's done to the transport network has seen a drop from 2.2 million passengers a day down to, it bottomed out at about 400,000 a week or so back. We're now at about 480,000, and I'm expecting that to just gradually start to increase again as we see schools go back and more and more businesses start to reopen. That said, though, we know that productivity, of course, is affected by inefficient transport systems and poor connection and telecommunications. And so I think there are some very big and key learnings out of this. Unfortunately, what we are at risk over the next couple of months is, we are going to see, with the easing of restrictions, rates of infection increase again. COVID's here, we can't escape it. So how our transport network responds in that regard is going to be a very significant challenge. I have deliberately kept every service going right through this. I have not turned a service off. Unlike some other state jurisdictions where they actually wound up their public transport, we've kept it going. So we want to look at ways in which we can incentivise people to travel in the intra-peak periods and do it more safely. So therein lies the challenge for the next month.
Minister, can I take the opportunity, so we'll have a hard finish at 11:15. This is our first Future Forum online, the DigitalDialogue as we call it. We're a bit of a late start, but we came home with a wet sail. Firstly, to the panellists, to G-Son, who had to leave us for an 11-hour meeting, to the Vice-Chancellor Emeritus, Barney Glover, and to the boss lady of the Southwest, to Lindy Dietz, who's always relied upon to be a strong advocate for the region, brought together by the ringmaster, the bearded ringmaster, the psychologist at Deloitte. A big thanks to Deloitte and Western Sydney Uni for supporting our Future Forum. The two groups that, they're probably the two leading, outside the dialogue, the two leading thinking organisations in the entire region on thought leadership. So we thank that. But on behalf of Adam and myself and the dialogue, firstly, Minister, to to Rod Staples, Elizabeth Mildwater, to Howard Collins, and all of the team, the essential workers at Transport for New South Wales, who have kept the trains running, kept the buses going, kept the traffic lights working, you name it. It's been a remarkable achievement and an agile achievement. One thing we can guarantee is the government's been back in front and in charge across the country and in New South Wales. I said we strongly want to see the tilt back to the private sector help you come out of it, but government's carried us through it remarkably. So please pass on our thanks to all of your teams and to you personally. I know we can't come back down and buy some scones on the South Coast yet, but
Not
pretty
yet.
soon we'll bring a delegation of Western Sydney to the South Coast, where the traditional holiday home of Western Sydney anyway. We want the Westies back, spending some money locally. And as soon as we get the green light, we encourage them to do it. We know the communities of South Coast are suffering. We know the ravaging of what fire can be, just with a little pandemic thrown in on top of drought and bushfire. It's been an interesting time to be in government. So thank you.
Yeah, no, Chris, thank you to the dialogue and what you guys do. And thank you for your sentiment about the fires. Can I just say to everybody, thank you for your kind message. I just have one pop up then. You know, look, it's been a bugger of a year, and a lot of people walk around saying this has been so unfair. We don't understand what we've done. But, you know, we've got a lot of broken people, and we're just trying to put lives back one by one together. And, you know, thank you for all the support. You know, during February, the way in which people came down here and supported business, people from Western Sydney, was amazing. I can't tell you the number of people from Western Sydney who come up to me in the middle of the street and just say, hey, we're just here to buy those scones that you talk of.
And can I have a station right on me?
No, they didn't actually, but anyway, they did come from the scones. But yeah, look, I think this is what makes us who we are, and you know, it has been a truly, you know, all-in effort to make sure that our rates of infection around COVID have not exploded like US, UK, and Italy and Spain and everywhere in between. And you know, it just shows how special we are when we all think together. So the dialogue is part of that journey, and obviously, you know, to our leaders and our community leaders throughout Western Sydney, it's important. So,
well, mate, wherever your journey takes you, and it's been an interesting one, and I know there's an interesting one ahead. It's not a standard political journey at the moment. This has been, you are the Bradfield of the West at the moment, the $80 million man pumping projects, and we'll continue. We'll still argue with you about exactly where they should be and when they should be, but nothing takes away from the fact that they're there in the largest single burst we've ever seen.
Yeah,
and
it's important.
We'll open up our community and we'll do our bit to contribute. So to everybody and those online, thank you for your time. It's a bold experiment. We'll be back, I promise. Again, it seems to have worked. The Premier said she wanted to see how you went before she'd do one. So
I apologise for being a bit late at the start, but we just had a few tech issues. But I'm sure in Sydney they can iron them out a little bit better than what we can down here. So thanks.
Wonderful. Thanks, everybody. Have a nice day.
See you.